If the United States government started to acquire Bitcoin, likely we're going to see Russia want to compete. We're going to see China want to compete. We're going to see all these other countries around the world that are going to start competing to accumulate Bitcoin as part of a strategic reserve. They're not buying it for a trade. They're not trying to make a quick buck. They're buying it to accumulate it, to store it as a reserve and long-term hold. And so with that, I think that the Bitcoin would be accumulated. It could drive tremendous performance.
Bitcoin is being drained from exchanges. Why? BlackRock continues to acquire Bitcoin en masse. Why? Donald Trump has major crypto plans for the US. What comes next out of all of this? We need answers. Brian Dixon, CEO of Off the Chain Capital, joins us. This man is an industry expert. I was surprised by some of the answers he gives in this interview. This is a video that you do not want to miss. Smash the like button. Let's start here.
Bitcoin reserves on exchanges hit a new multi-year low yesterday. Over 1 billion worth of Bitcoin left exchanges in 7 days. In fact, we have not seen Bitcoin exchange reserve levels this low since almost 2018. Brian Dixon, is all hell breaking loose in Bitcoin markets right now?
I would not say that at all. I think there's a couple things you want to look at in regards to Bitcoin leaving exchanges. One would be, is that flowing into self-custody? Because people are looking to become more long-term holders. I would say that's a good sign. Another thing is, where's the Bitcoin actually going? Is it flowing from a hot wallet in an exchange to a trust company or a qualified custodian for their own offline cold storage? So you really have to pay attention to where that Bitcoin is flowing to develop a better analysis of what's happening. But I would not say that all hell is breaking loose as of today.
All hell breaking loose, not necessarily a bad thing, but I'm glad that you're putting our minds at ease. So the Bitcoin is leaving exchanges. We're not sure exactly where it's going. Is this a bullish, is the takeaway from this bullish or non-consequential, or how do you think about it?
So I think it depends on where it's going, right? So if it's going into self-custody, I would view that as more of a long-term hold, which I would say is a bullish indicator because it's actually going to shrink supply, which could create more volatility and potential price appreciation with a limited supply if more people are wanting to enter the Bitcoin market, because that could create a narrative around scarcity. In addition to that, we saw some stuff with Binance last week where there were some issues around some of the Palestinian accounts. And I know there were some protests around Binance because of this. And we started to see some people actually remove Bitcoin from Binance. So whether they were moving that to a different exchange or they were moving that into self-custody, I think that's probably just some short-term issues that they're working through. But that is another reason why we may have seen some outflows over the last 7 days.
Brian, let's zoom out a little bit. You have a lot of experience in markets, in the crypto market, in tech. This is not your first rodeo. What are your big picture macro thoughts for the rest of 2024 and going into 2025?
So if we look at Bitcoin specifically, historically, the best time to be allocated to the asset is the 6 months before the Bitcoin halving and then 12 to 18 months post Bitcoin halving. Now, the most recent Bitcoin halving occurred in April 19th of this year. So we're right in that sweet spot right now. And I think in terms of price movement, it's pretty standard for what we've seen historically in terms of percentage increases and decreases over time. I would really anticipate that the remainder of this year into the first half of 2025, we should really see some exciting things happen. And one of the reasons I believe that is around the Bitcoin ETFs. So we've seen a tremendous inflow since those were launched in February of this year. But it's my opinion that we really haven't seen the largest allocations to the Bitcoin ETF yet that we will see in time. And the reason I think that is because the biggest investors in the world, the foundations, the pension plans, the sovereign wealth funds, these investors have very long due diligence timelines. And it may take 12 months of due diligence for them to research it, get it past their investment committee, educate their clients, et cetera, before they end up allocating. So I think maybe later this year into early 2025 is when we'll really start to see some very large allocations to the Bitcoin ETFs, because these large investors will have made it through their investment process. In addition to that, as a general macro outlook, I believe the election in the United States will have a lot to do with what we see happen with markets over the course of the next year. Right now, we have President Trump and recently RFK Jr. that stepped aside to endorse President Trump. I believe that would be very favorable for the digital asset ecosystem if Trump is ultimately elected, whereas the Harris administration has been historically very hostile towards the crypto sector. So, albeit a change in stance from the Harris administration, which it doesn't look like that's happening, that hostility may continue into that presidency if she's ultimately elected. So I think people really have to pay attention to that as well.
So Donald Trump claims he is the Bitcoin president. If Donald Trump gets elected, do you think that's orders of magnitude better for the crypto industry?
I believe so because back in 2020, Donald Trump was not very pro Bitcoin, but recently he's changed his stance. I think he's gotten much more integrated with the digital asset community and is receiving much better feedback and education and understanding of this new technology and asset class. And we don't want entrepreneurs in the space to move to other jurisdictions because we're going to lose jobs in the United States because of that. And I think he's starting to understand that as well, that with this emerging technology sector, he wants to keep those jobs on US soil. And with that, I think he's creating much more pro-Bitcoin stances. What we saw in Nashville this year at the Bitcoin conference, Donald Trump noted that if elected, he would create a Bitcoin strategic reserve. What we know today is that the Department of Justice has around 200,000 Bitcoin in its possession that it has seized through illicit activity and other issues online. And Donald Trump noted that he may take that 200,000 Bitcoin and move it from the DOJ to the Department of Treasury. And I think that would be the initial stockpile, and the US government could continue to build from there. But somebody who really understands Bitcoin is RFK Jr. And, his speech at the Bitcoin conference in Nashville this year was very specific around what he wanted to do. And now that he has actually endorsed Trump and it's looking like they could potentially work together ultimately if Trump is elected, I would really look at RFK Jr. as somebody that provided incredible, valuable feedback for the digital asset ecosystem and how that could be integrated in the US financial sector.
Let me ask you about this, Brian. The question is ultimately your price outlook, but let me set it up like this. To me, I think Bitcoin hitting $100,000 in 2025. To me, I think that's obvious. Nobody can predict the future. Anything can happen. But you mentioned some of the things. We have Fed rate cuts. We have the US election. We have a potential Bitcoin president. We have BlackRock, Bitcoin ETFs in general, crypto being institutionalized. Not to mention just general use case, utility, revenue, and usership in the crypto industry. So my question to you is, if you had to give your best guess, does Bitcoin clear $130,000 in 2025, above or below in 2025?
I think that would be a floor. Now, if we look at models historically, some things like trendline analysis show that Bitcoin should be valued around $150,000 today, but it's not. It's trading at close to $100,000 less than that. So according to trendline analysis, Bitcoin is very undervalued. If we look at things like stock to flow, 3 of the last 4 times Bitcoin has gone through its bull cycles, it's actually reached 2 standard deviations higher than where that model value indicated it should be. So 1 standard deviation higher than the stock to flow model for this current cycle would put Bitcoin at around $1 million. 2 standard deviations would put it around $2.3 million. Now, I'm not going to say it's going to go to that level, but I think the $100,000 to $130,000 price range that you noted to me is a floor. I would project that it's actually going to reach much higher than that. And one very important thing to consider is ultimately, if we do have somebody like President Trump that's elected, and it happens to be very favorable for the digital asset ecosystem, we may reach a point where we could have nation state adoption, and it would have a geopolitical game theory race that would play out. And what I mean by that is if the United States government started to acquire Bitcoin, likely we're going to see Russia want to compete. We're going to see China want to compete. We're going to see all these other countries around the world that are going to start competing to accumulate Bitcoin as part of a strategic reserve. And the benefit of that is that when a country acquires something for a strategic reserve, they're not buying it for a trade. They're not trying to make a quick buck. They're buying it to accumulate it, to store it as a reserve and long-term hold, like we've done with gold for many, many years. And so with that, I think that the Bitcoin will be accumulated. It could drive tremendous performance. And the projections that we could see from that, I think, are far beyond what we're even talking about right now.
Appreciate you giving us your time today, Brian. Just have a question or 2 left as we're wrapping things up. I know that you're not only bullish on Bitcoin, but you're bullish on the whole crypto space. Would you say, and like Ethereum has an ETF now too, are you more bullish on Bitcoin or Ethereum nowadays? Do you think Ethereum is a better bet than Bitcoin, or how do you think about it?
I just look at them in 2 very different ways. So Bitcoin, I look at as it's solving a very specific problem with our fiat money printing system, whereas Ethereum is solving a very different use case and problem, which is, digital smart contracting. And Ethereum has a lot of competitors, right? So, Ethereum has some challenges right now. It has extremely high gas fees, and then it has things like Solana and Binance Smart Chain and a variety of other smart contracting protocols that's competing against it. So what we ultimately don't know is Ethereum going to be Ask Jeeves, and another one of these smart contracting protocols is going to be Google? It's just too early for us to figure that out. Ethereum has obviously gained a tremendous amount of utility and application in a variety of different things, and it has a huge first mover advantage. And so it may work through these challenges over time, and we could have a variety of smart contracting platforms that are competing for different use cases and applications. It's also possible long term that some of the digital asset ecosystem could collapse on top of Bitcoin as new layers continue to be evolved on top of Bitcoin. And that's just too early for us to figure out. But I do think Bitcoin's use case, I don't think really any other digital asset protocol is competing with Bitcoin in terms of trying to have this replacement to states controlling the money supply and having the opportunity for full sovereignty over a digital monetary system. And I don't think anything else is really trying to, because Bitcoin has the user adoption, it has the technology, it's the most secure network. What I actually think could be an interesting thing long term is how Bitcoin and other digital asset chains could really interact with each other. So for example, what happens if you have a smart contracting platform like Ethereum, but it anchors its transactions in Bitcoin's blockchain for security purposes? So it can solve an application outside the scope of what Bitcoin may be built for today, but anchor in the security network of Bitcoin. And I think we'll see some really interesting new protocols and applications that get developed with that in mind.
So it sounds like the answer is Bitcoin. You think Bitcoin is still the smart play?
I think Bitcoin as of today is still the smart play. I think it'll continue to be the smart play for many years to come. If I would look at allocations, I would say from a digital asset perspective, investors should look at Bitcoin as a bulk of their allocation, and the remaining ecosystem should be treated like a venture investment at this point in time.
Brian, appreciate you sharing this alpha with us today. I'm Aaron of Altcoin Daily. I encourage everybody to go follow Brian. And please, Brian, give us final thoughts. Feel free to plug yourself, your company, but just final thoughts.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for having me today. I really appreciate it. I think the second half of this year into early 2025 is going to be very exciting for the digital asset universe. At Off the Chain Capital, if anyone's interested in learning more about us, we're a deep discount value style investment firm in the blockchain space. So we're looking for unique ways to acquire $1 worth of blockchain assets for 50 cents. And so if you want to learn more about us, please go to offthechain.capital, or please feel free to follow me on Twitter at BrianDixon06.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.